That's not my son. Julian's voice cut through the air like a blade, his eyes locked on the baby in Vanessa's arms. The sterile, white hospital room felt suffocating, as if the walls were closing in on her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. She just held Soren tighter, his small body trembling in her arms, as the weight of Julian's rejection crashed over her. This wasn't about a DNA test. It was about something darker, deeper, how Soren's eyes of vivid green didn't match the perfection Julian has crafted, different from his. This threatened the perfect world Julian had worked his entire life to build. And in that moment, Vanessa realized it wasn't just her son who was rejected. It was her too. Vanessa stood there, her newborn son in her arms, the weight of Julian's rejection pressing down on her chest. A man she had loved, a man who promised her a life of partnership, had turned away the moment their son was born, not because of any doubt of parentage, but because his child didn't fit the flawless image he had meticulously curated. It wasn't about who Soren was. It was about who Julian wanted him to be. The eyes, the physical traits that made Soren who he was, were a glaring reminder that not all legacies are as pristine as Julian had imagined. In the sterile silence of the hospital room, Vanessa's heart shattered. Julian wasn't just rejecting their child. He was rejecting her too, rejecting their love, their future, everything they had built. And in that instant, she realized the truth. This wasn't about doubt, about genetics, or even about Soren. This was about image. It was about legacy. It was about how their son didn't fit into Julian's vision of perfection. And just like that, Vanessa's world was rewritten. But this wouldn't be the end. Vanessa wouldn't let it be. She wouldn't fall victim to this betrayal, no matter how deep it ran. She had the power to survive, to rise, to rebuild everything she had lost, for her son and for herself. And the man who had thrown them both away? He had no idea what he had unleashed. Welcome back, my beautiful family and friends. I've truly missed you all. It's been a challenging season with a few technical issues, but by God's grace, everything is coming back together. Thank you for standing by me. Your love, patience, and support me more than words can express. As we celebrate this beautiful Christmas season, I want to send warm holiday greetings to every one of you. May this time bring you rest, joy, renewed hope, and moments of peace with those you love. Before we begin, I want to say a short prayer over everyone watching. To the women watching, may God strengthen you, comfort you, and fill your heart with peace, favor, and joy this season. To the men watching, may God guide your steps, bless the work of your hands, and grant you wisdom in all that you do. And may God's protection, love, and grace rest upon every single one of you. Amen. If you're ready for today's story, please hit the subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. My USA and UK family, I see you and I appreciate you. And please stay till the end, because tomorrow I'll be sharing another story you won't want to miss. Now, let's get into the story. It all began the day Soren was born, the moment that shattered Vanessa's life and set her on a path she never could have imagined. But this wasn't just about her husband's rejection. It was about reclaiming her future, her identity. Vanessa Brielle was no longer just a woman left behind. She was about to become something far more dangerous. The days that followed were a blur of cold silences and empty promises. Julian was gone, but so was everything else that had once been her world. The life she had imagined was slipping through her fingers, unraveling thread by thread. The media didn't waste any time. Neither did Valendra. Before Vanessa could even bring Soren home, the storm had already begun. Every headline, every article, every whisper from the Charlton family was designed to paint her as a villain, a woman who had deceived her husband, a woman who had hidden the truth about their child's parentage. Vanessa was no longer the doting wife of a powerful billionaire. She was a scheming, lying woman who had tarnished the family name. Julian Charlton was the mastermind behind it all. The woman who had long manipulated the media and the public to control the image of her family. Now, she was using every contact in her arsenal to twist the narrative. Vanessa Brielle, the socialite wife turned cheater, accused of hiding the truth about her son's paternity. The headlines came fast and furious, each one sharper than the last. Vanessa stared at the phone screen as one of the articles flashed across it, the words searing into her mind. Paternity questions arise as Billionaire CEO Julian Charlton disowns his son. Beneath it, the story of her betrayal was laid bare, her supposed affair, the lies she'd allegedly told, the betrayal of the family. Julian was a victim, his perfect legacy tainted by the woman who had betrayed him. A perfect legacy. The phrase repeated in her mind, a mockery of everything she had believed. As the press began to circle, Vanessa's phone rang incessantly. Most of the calls were from unknown numbers, some from old acquaintances who had once been close friends. Every single one of them, when they spoke, carried the weight of a silent judgment. They didn't need to say it outright. Vanessa could feel it. The distance, the avoidance, the careful words that skirted around the truth. They were terrified of being on the wrong side of Julian and Belendra. Her friends began to fade away one by one. Some didn't call back. Others sent texts full of empty sympathy. Only a few tried to stand by her, but even they felt the pressure of the Charltons' influence. In her heart, Vanessa knew that Julian's betrayal was only the beginning. What was happening now, the media circus, the isolation, was only a prelude to something much darker, the total erasure of who she was. By the time she had recovered enough to leave the hospital with Soren, the damage had already been done. A few days later, Vanessa was alone in her living room, cradling Soren, his tiny face peaceful as he slept. The stillness of the apartment felt suffocating. She heard the sound of footsteps approaching her door, and when the knock came, her heart sank. The lawyer's office. Vanessa opened the door to find a courier holding an envelope, the weight of it immediately sinking into her stomach. "Good afternoon, Ms. Brielle," the courier said, his voice polite but cold. "This is for you." He handed her the thick envelope, his gaze flickering briefly to Soren in her arms. Without another word, he turned and left. Vanessa closed the door and ripped open the envelope, the legal papers spilling out like a final blow to the gut. Divorce papers. There were no words of explanation, no attempt to negotiate or talk things through. Julian's legal team had already made their decision. There was no turning back. Her life, her marriage, her identity, all had been wiped away in a single stroke of pen. Her hands trembled as she scanned the papers, her eyes blurring with the weight of the betrayal. There were no discussions, no options for reconciliation. This wasn't just a divorce. This was an erasure, an attempt to strip her of everything she had once known, including her name, her family, her future. Vanessa's lips trembled as she took a deep breath and signed the papers, the ink pressing into her mind like an irreversible mark. The sting of Julian's rejection, coupled with the harsh reality of the situation, almost broke her. But then something shifted deep within her. She felt the first flicker of something she hadn't felt in weeks, a spark. Resolve. She signed the papers, her heart heavy, but her mind clear. The world had tried to erase her, but they had underestimated her. Vanessa Brielle wasn't finished. She had been rejected, abandoned, humiliated. But in that moment, she made a vow to herself and to Soren. She would rise. A few days later, as the first pieces of her old life disappeared from the apartment, Vanessa stood by the window, staring out at the city skyline, her fingers tightening around Soren's tiny hand. The world outside felt distant, cold, and unforgiving. But for the first time in days, she realized she wasn't alone anymore. Soren was her anchor, her reason for moving forward, for surviving. The storm was far from over. But it was time for her to fight back, to reclaim what was hers, and to build something new, something that no one could take from her. She would take back everything they tried to steal. They didn't just take your name, they tried to take your future. But you're still here, you're still standing. Stay strong. If you believe that no one should have the power to erase you, hit subscribe. It's time to rise again. Vanessa stood at the edge of the Miami skyline, the place where everything had once felt perfect. The dazzling lights, the high-end boutiques, the parties, all of it. But now, it felt like a distant memory, a world she could never return to. With a deep breath, she turned her back on the city that had once promised her everything and took so much away. She'd packed her life into 2 suitcases and a small bag for Soren, each one holding the remnants of a life that no longer existed. She'd left behind the mansion on Star Island, the luxury cars, the private jets, all symbols of a world that had rejected her. Vanessa Brielle was gone. Now, she was someone new, someone untraceable, someone who couldn't be erased again. The name change had been the first step, a quiet yet powerful act of defiance. Vanessa Brielle had died the day Soren was born. In her place was someone who didn't need the Charlton name to define her. She chose a new identity, a fresh start. It was like shedding old skin, leaving behind a woman who had been pushed aside and forgotten. She was no longer Vanessa Brielle, the wife of the billionaire CEO. She was just Vanessa Amore now. Vanessa moved to a small city far from the reach of Julian's empire. The decision was deliberate. Miami was too close to the life she'd left behind. Every corner held memories of rejection. Every street was a reminder of the empire that had once been hazed to share. The new city was quiet, away from the headlines, away from the judgment. There were no familiar faces, no whispers of the Charlton name. It was here, in this place of quiet anonymity, that Vanessa began her true rebirth. Her first job was a small one, an entry-level position at a local business consulting firm. The work was far from glamorous, but it was honest, and it was hers. She had no desire to rush, to chase after a life that had been handed to her on a silver platter. This time, she would build her life on her own terms, one small step at a time. Vanessa threw herself into learning the ropes. She spent hours reading business books, attending local networking events, and absorbing everything she could about the industry. The world she had once been a part of, the high society circles, the glitzy events, the billion-dollar deals, was a distant echo. The real work, the kind that changed lives and built empires, was happening here, out of sight, under the radar. She didn't need a name or a title to succeed. All she needed was herself. And Soren. Soren grew, his bright green eyes shining with the same fire that now burned inside her. He was her anchor, her reason for waking up every day and moving forward. Vanessa poured all her love, energy, and focus into raising him. She became the mother she'd always wanted to be, strong, patient, and driven. Each day with Soren was a reminder of the resilience she had found within herself. Every laugh, every milestone, every moment they shared was proof that her life wasn't over. It was just beginning. And every small victory she achieved in her wake was a step toward the bigger plan she was building in silence. But it wasn't just about surviving. It was about thriving. Vanessa knew the path ahead wasn't going to be easy. Rebuilding her life would take time, but she was no stranger to challenges. Her journey had only just begun, and the world would soon learn that Vanessa Amore was not a woman to be underestimated. You can start over, rebuild your life, your way. It's not too late to become the person you were always meant to be. Subscribe if you've ever had to reinvent yourself after betrayal. Vanessa's journey is just beginning. The world Vanessa had left behind was slowly creeping back into her life, not with an apology or remorse, but with a vicious new assault. It was almost as if Julian and his family had decided that they couldn't just let her disappear into the shadows. They had to erase her completely. Vanessa Charlton, Julian's mother, had always been a puppeteer in the family's drama. Now, she was pulling every string to rewrite the story. Vanessa wasn't just a woman who'd been cast aside anymore. She was a liar and a betrayer. The first of the rumors hit her inbox on a quiet Wednesday morning. She was sipping coffee at her tiny apartment, a far cry from the penthouses and gated estates she had once known. The headline caught her eye: Billionaire's ex-wife linked to affair amidst paternity scandal. Beneath the title, the article painted her as a woman with a secret. The story went on to suggest that not only had Vanessa been unfaithful during her marriage to Julian, but she had been carrying on an affair with a mysterious figure, a wealthy businessman, no less. There were no sources, no facts, just accusations. Vanessa clenched her fist around the mug, her knuckles white, as the heat of the coffee seeped through the porcelain. Valendra, she thought. She didn't need to read further. The timing was no coincidence. The smear campaign had begun. The rumors spread like wildfire, catching fire in every corner of the city. The press was abuzz. Social media, once a distant world that had no place in her new life, was now filled with vitriol. Vanessa Brielle's web of lies, they wrote. The scandal that rocked the Charlton family. Every post, every article, every tweet made it clear Vanessa wasn't just a betrayed wife. She was a villain in the story. But Vanessa, in the quiet of her new life, refused to let herself be consumed by the chaos. There would be no public outcry, no angry calls to reporters. She knew better than to try to battle this in the court of public opinion. This was exactly what Valendra wanted. For Vanessa to lash out, to show weakness, to get caught in the web of lies and distractions. Instead, Vanessa stayed calm. Silent strength, that was a key. While the world was distracted by rumors and false claims, she would focus on building something they couldn't take away from her. She began to quietly expand her connections. The people she had met in her new life were different. They weren't part of the Charlton circle, and they weren't swayed by the image of wealth and perfection that Julian had so carefully curated. These were real people, driven by integrity and hard work, people who didn't care about headlines or billion-dollar families. They saw Vanessa for who she truly was, someone who had survived betrayal and was now working to carve out her own path. One by one, her new allies came through: entrepreneurs, investors, fellow businesswomen. They recognized her strength, her ability to stay steady in the storm. They respected her ability to hold her ground, to work quietly without the need for constant validation. But the smears didn't stop. Velendra kept feeding the media machine, watching as Vanessa's reputation crumbled in the public eye. The more the world turned against her, the more Vanessa dug in. This wasn't the first time someone had tried to tear her down, and it wouldn't be the last. She had lived through the kind of rejection that made everything else seem small. And she would survive this, too. Vanessa's focus shifted. With her new business connections, she started to build in silence. Every deal, every conversation, every plan she put into motion was done with precision. No fanfare, no public announcements. She wasn't interested in proving anything to the world. She was building for herself, for Soren, and in time, they would see who she really was. The world may turn against you, but only you can decide how your story ends. Don't let their lies define you. Subscribe if you believe in the power of silent strength, of turning the tables and using what they tried to destroy. Vanessa had learned the hard way that the loudest moves often made the biggest noise. The world didn't need to know what she was doing, and frankly, it wasn't her job to prove anything to anyone anymore. The real power came from working in silence. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't loud, but it was effective. And as she settled into her new life, Vanessa's quiet rise began. The first project was modest, a small apartment building in a rundown part of the city. It wasn't glamorous, nothing like the luxury property she had once been accustomed to with Julian, but it was hers. She didn't need grandeur, not yet. What she needed was a foundation, something solid to build upon, a base from which to grow. Vanessa took every penny she had saved and poured it into that building. She worked with contractors, secured financing through connections that didn't know her real identity, and handled every detail. It wasn't just a real estate project. It was a statement that she could build something from nothing. Her first small win wasn't about making a name for herself. It was about proving to herself that she could. The renovations were simple, but effective. New windows, fresh paint, and updated fixtures. The building started to shine again, its tired walls giving new life. By the time it was ready for tenants, Vanessa had already set her sights on the next project. But this wasn't just about flipping properties. It was about laying the groundwork for something bigger, something that would one day make her untouchable. Vanessa didn't rush. The world didn't need to know what she was doing. She stayed in the background, keeping her business dealings quiet, working through anonymous channels. No one knew the woman behind the deals. They didn't need to. She had learned from the best, and the best didn't need applause or recognition. They just needed results. Her new network of investors, developers, and property owners had no idea who she really was. She was just another successful player in the market, a woman with an uncanny ability to spot opportunity, a woman who operated with precision and quiet determination. But it was more than just the deals. Everything Vanessa did was for Soren's future. He was her everything. Every project she took on, every investment, every connection she made was to build a life that would give him a chance at the world Julian had once promised but had so callously taken away. Soren had no idea what his mother was doing. Not yet. But one day, he would see the empire she was building from the ground up, and he would understand the sacrifices she made, the resilience she showed, all for him. Every day, Vanessa taught Soren the importance of perseverance. She taught him that strength didn't always look like victory. Sometimes it was quiet. Sometimes it was about getting up every day and doing what needed to be done, no matter how small the steps seemed. As the months passed, Vanessa's empire began to take shape. The small real estate projects grew, and with them, her confidence. She didn't need a flashy office or PR team. She didn't need to be on the cover of magazines. She just needed to keep moving forward, quietly and steadily. The world would catch up eventually. Her competitors, the ones who didn't know her story, would never see her coming. And that, Vanessa realized, was the most powerful move she could make. She was building an empire in the shadows. And one day, the world would see it, not because she shouted about it, but because it would be undeniable. Sometimes, the most powerful move you can make is the one no one sees coming. If you believe true power doesn't need to shout, but quietly conquers, subscribe to see the next step of Vanessa's rise. It was a cold morning when the interview aired. Vanessa had been in the middle of preparing breakfast for Soren when the phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. She glanced at the screen, her stomach tightening when she saw the headline. Julian Charlton opens up about his family's future. My son was a mistake. Her heart sank. She couldn't bring herself to watch it, but the notifications kept coming in. The shock, the outrage, the headlines flooding in. The words Julian had spoken in that interview rang louder than anything she could have imagined. Soren was a mistake I can never fix. I will not raise a child who doesn't fit the image of what this family stands for. Each word felt like a punch. It wasn't just a rejection of Soren. It was a public condemnation, an attempt to publicly erase them both. Julian hadn't just abandoned his son. He had now severed every possible connection. He'd branded Soren as an outcast in the world they had once inhabited, and in doing so, he'd reopened the wound he'd left in Vanessa's heart. Vanessa stared at the screen, watching as the world erupted in outrage over Julian's words. Some defended him, others called him cruel, but none of it mattered. What stung most wasn't the public's reaction. It was the realization that Julian's rejection of Soren was now final. There would be no turning back. The betrayal, the abandonment, it was all too much. But this time, Vanessa didn't break. This wasn't just a rejection of a husband or a family. This was something bigger, something more destructive. This was about her son. For the first time in years, Vanessa felt a fire in her chest, but it wasn't the heat of hurt. It was the heat of rage. This wasn't about fighting for Julian anymore. This was about fighting for Soren, for their future, and for herself. Her dignity had been stolen, but no one was going to take her son's future. Not again. Vanessa took a deep breath, staring out at the empty street below her window. The anger was sharp and bitter, but underneath it was something else, a deep, unshakable resolve. Julian's cruelty had cut deep, but it had also ignited a fierce desire in her. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was planning. The time for survival had passed. The time for revenge had begun. Vanessa's mission was no longer about responding to Julian's betrayal with emotion. She had done that. She had cried, screamed, and felt the weight of loss. But now? Now, it was about reclaiming everything he had taken. Her identity, her dignity, and most importantly, her son's future. She spent hours on the phone with lawyers, financial experts, and business contacts, planning her next steps. She knew the world would look at her and think she was finished. They didn't know the woman she had become. The quiet strength, the relentless ambition, the deep drive to build something that no one could take from her. They couldn't see it yet, but they would. This was her turning point. No more reacting. No more running. It was time to strike back, but she would do it quietly, in the shadows, where no one could see her coming. Vanessa was no longer a victim. She was a force. As the interview continued to make headlines, the media frenzy around her family's destruction became a noise that would ultimately drown itself out. Vanessa knew that what she built next would be unstoppable. It wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be glamorous, but it would be unbreakable. Her son deserved better, and she would make sure he had it. They think they can break you, but they've only made you stronger. Revenge isn't about anger. It's about strength. If you've been rejected or abandoned, you're not alone. Subscribe to watch Vanessa turn this pain into power. The time had come. Vanessa stood on the edge of the bustling city, her eyes scanning the skyline. But now it wasn't the glittering towers that held her attention. It was the spaces in between. The places Julian had long ignored, dismissed, and written off as unworthy. Her empire had grown, quietly, steadily, without fanfare or attention. Every deal had been calculated. Every step forward had been strategic. And now, she was ready. Ready to infiltrate the world that had once rejected her and take back what was rightfully hers. But this time, it wasn't about reclaiming a life she had lost. It was about seizing something even bigger, the future. Vanessa had always known that Julian and his family saw the world through a lens of wealth, status, and appearances. They never looked beyond their gilded circle. The places they deemed unworthy, the properties they had abandoned because they didn't fit into their perfect legacy, those were the places she would now own. She wasn't just going to step back into Julian's world. She was going to take it over, piece by piece. Her first move was simple. Real estate. While Julian had been focused on the flashy, high-profile properties that made headlines, Vanessa had quietly bought up buildings and plots of land in the areas he'd once dismissed. Old apartments, run-down offices, forgotten spaces that had potential. She saw the value that no one else could. As the deals piled up, so did her confidence. The woman who had once been dismissed as weak and discarded was now becoming a force to be reckoned with. When Vanessa finally made her return, it wasn't with a grand entrance or a public statement. She didn't need the attention. She was already getting it, just by owning what Julian had let slip through his fingers. She walked into Julian's world again, but this time it was different. This time, she was no longer the vulnerable wife. The woman who had been humiliated, cast aside, and erased was now a self-made businesswoman. She was powerful. She had control. And the pieces of the empire Julian had built, the very ones he thought would destroy her, were now part of a growing foundation. Vanessa stood tall in meetings where once she had stood quietly beside Julian. She exchanged sharp words with investors, closed deals, and signed contracts, all while Julian remained blissfully unaware who was behind the deals that were slowly but surely slipping from his grasp. His once impenetrable world was now starting to crumble. Vanessa's strategy had always been simple. Do it quietly. She didn't need to make a public splash. She didn't need the press. All she needed was to build her empire on her own terms, in silence, until the time was right. Julian had been so focused on appearances, on keeping the public convinced that he was perfect, that he had failed to see the quiet storm brewing around him. Every property Vanessa took, every deal she secured, was a subtle message, one that only she fully understood. And soon, the world would too. They may have tried to erase you, but now you're unstoppable. You become everything they feared. If you believe in building your empire from the ground up, no matter the cost, hit subscribe. Vanessa had learned long ago that power wasn't about being loud or flashy or even making a grand gesture. Power was about precision. It was about moving in silence, making moves that seemed small to the untrained eye but were calculated to change the course of everything. And now, as the battle for control of Julian's world reached its peak, Vanessa was proving that nothing, not even betrayal, could stop her from reclaiming what was hers. Julian's empire, once a fortress of luxury and influence, was now crumbling from the inside. The cracks had started small, overlooked properties, abandoned projects, missed opportunities, all the things Vanessa had quietly snatched up and transformed into profitable assets. Julian had been too busy playing the role of the perfect CEO, maintaining his carefully curated image, to see the quiet storm approaching. Vanessa's approach was never to fight fire with fire. She didn't need to. Julian's arrogance had been his downfall. He had underestimated the woman he had discarded, and she was going to make him pay for that mistake. Vanessa moved in on the spaces he had left behind, the buildings he had written off, the investments he had neglected, the corners of the market he thought were beneath him. She took them one by one, turning them into profitable ventures that not only outpaced Julian's efforts, but quietly eclipsed them. Where Julian relied on brute force and an army of lawyers, Vanessa outsmarted him at every turn. Her strategy was simple: patience, precision, persistence. Each deal was a calculated move in a game of chess. While Julian played checkers, Vanessa played a game of strategy he would never understand until it was too late. The public began to notice the shift. At first, the media still followed Julian, captivated by his image as a successful CEO, the powerful billionaire. But as Vanessa's investments grew, as her silent empire expanded, more and more stories began to focus on her. People started to take notice of her strength, the same strength that had once been mocked and ridiculed. She had fought back against the betrayal, against the public rejection, and now she was building an empire of her own. The tables were turning. The public perception of Vanessa shifted. The woman who had been abandoned and erased was now the one they admired. Her story was no longer about heartbreak and loss. It was about resilience. Meanwhile, Julian's image began to crumble. The cruelty he had shown Vanessa, the way he had discarded his own son, could no longer be ignored. What had once been seen as a man protecting his legacy was now being exposed for what it truly was: arrogance, privilege, and a deep-rooted fear of losing control. The media, which had once painted him as a billionaire mogul, now began to question his leadership, his decisions, his very character. The man who had once been on top was now teetering on the edge, and Vanessa was waiting, just out of sight, to take everything he had once taken for granted. It was happening slowly, piece by piece. Vanessa wasn't rushing. She didn't need to. She was already starting to take control of parts of the Charlton Empire, quietly, without fanfare, but with absolute certainty ***. With each deal, each takeover, she edged closer to Julian's throne. And one day, he would look up and realize what had happened. He would see Vanessa not as a woman he'd discarded, but as a woman who had become unstoppable. Her rise wasn't about revenge in the traditional sense. It wasn't about violence or loud declarations of war. It was about proving, with every single move she made, that she had never been broken. Revenge isn't about the moment you win. It's about every step you take to prove that you've never been broken. If you're ready to see how Vanessa gets the final victory, subscribe now. The final pieces were in place. Vanessa stood in the conference room, looking out over the sprawling skyline that she had once looked at from the shadows. But now, everything had changed. She had changed. It wasn't just a business deal. It wasn't just about the empire that Julian had once controlled. This was a victory, the culmination of everything she had worked for, everything she had fought for. It wasn't just about the properties, the deals, or the assets. It was about taking back what Julian had tried to steal from her and using it to build something that could never be taken away again. For years, Julian had believed that he could erase her, that he could wipe her off the map and move on without consequence. But he hadn't accounted for the one thing that Vanessa had always possessed: resilience. She had survived the betrayal. She had survived the isolation. She had survived the cruel public rejection. And now, she was standing at the helm of the very empire that he had once tried to bury her in. The Charlton family business, which had once been a symbol of Julian's power, was now a pawn in Vanessa's game. She had outsmarted him at every turn. His empire, built on arrogance and vanity, was now hers. Every corner of it, from the neglected properties to the businesses Julian had abandoned, Vanessa had carefully woven herself into the fabric of it all. And today, she would take the final step, the ultimate takeover. Vanessa's legal team had worked tirelessly behind the scenes, securing every necessary piece to make this moment inevitable. Julian had no idea how thoroughly she had outmaneuvered him. For months, Vanessa had infiltrated the boardrooms, working with investors who didn't buy into Julian's grand illusion of perfection. She had forged connections in the shadows, buying up shares of his company piece by piece, all while maintaining her untraceable identity. And now, the moment had arrived. With one final, expertly executed move, Vanessa took control of the Charlton family business. It was a clean, surgical takeover. No violence, no explosions. Just the quiet power of a woman who had spent years building, learning, and growing. Vanessa had become everything Julian had feared: unassailable, strategic, and unstoppable. As Vanessa sat in Julian's chair, in the very boardroom that had once been the stage of his power, she realized the weight of what she had done. She wasn't just a survivor anymore. She wasn't just a woman who had been abandoned and erased. She was a woman who had rebuilt. She had taken everything from Julian, not with rage, but with precision. And now, the empire he had worked so hard to build was under her control. This was more than revenge. It was a rebirth. Full circle. Vanessa had come from the depths of betrayal and abandonment, and now she stood in a place no one could take away from her. Not Julian, not Velendra, not anyone. Her legacy was no longer defined by her past with Julian. It was her own. They tried to break you, but now you're unbreakable. And this victory, it's all yours. If you're ready to stand tall and watch Vanessa take her final victory, subscribe. This is the moment of true power. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazy and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one. L.